And this, then, is the big difference between us and chimpanzees. And it's why we're the dominant primate species on the planet. Human beings are hardwired to teach and learn from each other. Chimps will copy something if it seems like a good idea at the time, but they tend not to copy the things that they deem unnecessary. For humans, it's precisely because we copy these unnecessary actions that we've been able to develop culture, language, sophisticated tools, and advanced skills. Now, the pioneers in any field are forced to learn through trial and error, but future generations have the luxury of learning by emulating those that came before. And as our skills have grown, so has our need to spread those skills through teaching. Chimps aren't going to college for advanced degrees in engineering, and they're certainly not getting subscriptions to internet training sites. But we are. And we learn largely by copying the actions of our parents, teachers, and mentors. Human see, human do. Teaching is so critical to our success as a species that we've developed a tendency to blindly trust the word of perceived experts when we're in unfamiliar territory, just as the children in the experiment blindly trusted the adults who taught them to operate the puzzle box. Now, in psychology, this tendency is called authority bias. We automatically trust the people we perceive to be the experts. If you're looking at an abstract work of art and you hear that the critics think it's a masterpiece, you're more likely to have a favorable reaction to it. If you're traveling in a foreign country, you'll copy the actions made by your host. If your doctor tells you to go home and soak your elbow in Kool-Aid and wear plaid skirts, you'd probably do that too. Anytime we're in over our heads, we automatically look to the experts for guidance, be they parents, teachers, or specialists in a field. And most of the time, we're correct to do so. But this tendency to blindly trust the experts can occasionally get us into trouble. Now, when taught to open the puzzle box, the kids in the experiment were wasting a little time and energy tapping and sliding unnecessarily. But in the grand scheme of things, this is really not that big of a mistake. But there are times when slavishly following the advice of perceived authority figures can have far more serious consequences. Sherman set the Wayback Machine for 1 week ago when we discussed superstition. We observed that our tendency to spot connections and patterns where there are none can cause superstitious behavior. One aspect we didn't discuss, however, is how these superstitions get passed down from generation to generation. It's one thing to go on a rush at the tables and suddenly believe that you own a lucky shirt, but it's another thing for an entire culture to believe that the number 4 is unlucky, like the Chinese do. 1.3 billion people can't all have had unfortunate experiences with the number 4. They must have learned this. As human beings, we learn from our elders, and we tend to copy what they do without question. And when you think about it, is throwing salt over your shoulder for good luck really that much different than boiling your water for good luck? Again, most of the time what we learn from our teachers is beneficial, but occasionally our blind trust means that irrational superstitions will replicate and spread generation after generation. Sometimes the experts pass along information that's just plain wrong. But even when the information you're receiving is correct, as it usually is, there's always the danger that you could misinterpret it. It's like the children's game of telephone. Communication is not always perfect. And if you make a mistake interpreting the expert information, your innate trust of its source might prevent you from giving it sufficient scrutiny. Years ago, one of the very first poker books I read was about limit hold'em. The moneymaker effect hadn't yet reached DEFCON 1, and much of the available literature was on limit games. But being a complete donkey, I memorized those starting hand charts and strategies from the limit book, and I blindly tried to apply them to No Limit. I didn't even realize they were two different games. Oh my God, I spewed so much money in those days. And while I lost, I got more and more frustrated because I had no idea why I was losing. I read it in a book. I mean, how could it be wrong? I was blindly copying what I'd learned, but because I misinterpreted the information and had no solid understanding of the underlying concepts, the whole thing blew up in my face. Often I get students who ask me, what do I do in this situation? That's a perfectly natural question. As a coach, they want me to tell them what to do when faced with the puzzle box of poker. They want me to give them a playbook, but a playbook will only get you so far in poker, and usually that's just not far enough. It might help stop the bleeding for a rank amateur, but you'll never really excel at the game if you're just memorizing. The poker environment is constantly shifting, and there are just too many variables to make any definitive playbook viable. Sometimes a standard play is the right one, sometimes it isn't. But at all times, you need to be able to answer the big question. Why are you doing what you're doing? It takes much longer to master, but if you understand the thought processes behind the decisions, then you can adapt. Memorizing a playbook is worthless when the environment changes or when your opponent changes. But if you understand why the plays were written in the first place, then when the game evolves, you can evolve with it and write your own playbook.